Namaste and welcome to Urban Chatterati. This is Abhinav Prakash. And today I'm joined by Harsh Gupta, author and investor, to discuss the recent announcements by the government regarding the banking sector and the finance sector. So, Harsh, welcome to the show.
Hi, Abhinav. Good to be on your show. How are you doing?
All good, Harsh. Same. I hope same is the story with you.
Yes.
I heard you are quite busy these days writing another book, perhaps?
Yes, perhaps. Yes.
So, Harsh, we have recently seen that Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman has announced the establishment of a bad bank. It was announced in the budget, but now we have the proper framework and the government backing for the same. So, what exactly is this bad bank?
So, Abhinav, conceptually, a bad bank is simply like a legal entity in which you put bad loans so that what remains are good banks. And this is basically a method that we've used, other countries have used. The idea is once you have a credit cycle, even putting aside corruption or cronyism that did happen in India's last credit cycle, let's say from 2003-4 to 2011-12, you even in a normal business cycle, even without some corruption, you will get some non-performing assets. You will get some over-optimistic projections on infrastructure, real estate, or industries which do not pan out. And basically, then those assets are, because the banks have to write them off or they have to put some equity against it. They have to do what is known as provisioning in the business. And because of that, their equity capital for new loans get relatively reduced. So what governments often do is they just take a lot of these bad loans at the end of a cycle, they put it in a bad bank, and they basically buy it at probably a higher price than what the market would buy. Not necessarily because the asset is that bad, but because there is not enough information. There's information asymmetry about a particular asset. So they buy in bulk. And often we find actually surprisingly sometimes in these bad bank situations, despite this bailout, the governments end up making money. For example, TARP program in the US, the Troubled Asset Relief Program in the US, when the global financial crisis happened in 2008-9, actually ended up making money. That $700, $800 billion bailout package. So the bad bank conceptually takes out the bad assets. The issue with the bad bank is it increases what in economics we call as moral hazard. That if banks know that every single time they do these bad underwriting, in a recent column in Hindustan Times, I said that along with commercial due diligence, you are also doing political due diligence for the last cycle. If the banks know that they'll be bailed out relatively quickly, relatively effortlessly, relatively painlessly, then what happens is that their incentive to be more careful in underwriting next time and to look at the underlying business proposal is less. So the balance is about making the economy run faster, while making sure that bad incentives do not get fully entrenched. So this is one of the reasons why perhaps there was an internal debate going on, I'm sure, in the government, more generally in the economic intelligence here, that should we have a bad bank or not? And the idea initially was not so fast. Let us first do IBC, the Insolvency Bankruptcy Code, which we did. Then it went through its own tweakings, through a lot of headline cases. Now we have a pre-packaged IBC for MSMEs. So now we are at a situation where finally with COVID, where it is clearly there has been so much pain in the banking sector that nobody would say that, okay, that was a good experience. Now that the bad bank has been created, next time I'll not think about it, right? So this is not moral hazard at this particular point of pain, so long in the process. And therefore the idea is to free some capital. The idea is 2 trillion rupees, around 2 lakh crore rupees, around 1% of GDP in two particular phases will be taken out. And the government will only put about 30,000 crore rupees of guarantee, not capital. So that's important to know. So what they'll do is this entity, which a lot of banks are private, public sector banks are creating together with 51% stake. This entity will issue receipts, paper called security receipts, and that will be guaranteed till about say 30,000 crore rupees. That also in a time bound manner for 5 years. So that allows these basically them to lever up their existing capital from the public sector banks. It levers up, it buys these assets from all these banks, the consortium as well as other banks. And then IBC basically attacks one bank, this one entity. Because what happens when IBC attacks entities which have multiple loan exposure? So let's say a company goes bad and it has taken loan from 10 banks. So the IBC process has to negotiate with 10 different stakeholders. And that has its own, somebody will do some trick, some legal case, and it will delay the whole process. In this case, everything will come in under one shadow. And that is basically the bad bank broad idea. But I would say it's only one aspect of the overall plumbing that we've been doing on the financial sector.
Yeah, very true. But many people have criticized that this bad bank is simply about saving the big corporates and the big banks at the expense of taxpayers' money. So it's only about privatization of profits and socialization of loss.
You're absolutely right. That is, I think, a valid concern. The issue is we have actually been directly bailing out the public sector banks through recapitalization throughout the so-called socialist era. So surprisingly, in the socialist era, we ended up nationalizing the banks. Those nationalized banks ended up making frequent bad loans, bad underwriting, which were frequently overwritten by direct capitalization, or what is known as recapitalization, right? Trillions of rupees. So the question is not about whether we are going to put some taxpayer rupee or not. In this case, actually, there is a guarantee being put. There's not actual capital being put. The point is, how do we reform the system without being very Calvinist about it, in the sense, without saying that let the pain exacerbate, let the chips fall where they may. We don't care about economic growth. Unfortunately, that's not, if you are actually an economic practitioner, policymaker in the hot seat, you cannot take that attitude. But we have to move towards a system where this kind of bad underwriting, once again, some underwriting will go bad in a normal business cycle. So not everything is a cronyist bailout. Although in the last cycle, clearly there was, and we can discuss this more often about how Indian finance is changing. But so in this sense, we've always bailed out these nationalized banks for the last 30, 40 years. In this case, actually, we are not directly bailing out. In this case, we are actually putting up a guarantee, which may or may not end up used in an aggregate sense.
Yes, true. But you also talk about there are other things which are being done by the government,
yes,
like the account aggregator thing, and
yes,
other provisions are being put in place. Lots of the changes are something which people don't even notice, because there's a minor change in rules and regulations. So what's going on and what's the future?
I think account aggregator is a great revolutionary change. But before going to that, let me try to give you a big picture of what's happening in India's financial sector. See, there are two broad kind of financial systems we generally talk about. One is known as the Anglo-American model, which is like what is known as an arm's length model. It's very kind of capital markets heavy. It's bond market heavy. It's stock market heavy, whereby corporations which are run by a professional board of directors. There's no really concept of promoters like we have in India, and a professional management. They raise money at an arm's length from the capital markets, and that's very much the UK-US model. There is another model called continental European, or we can say East Asian model, in which case the banks, often directly nationalized or de facto under the government's control, along with industries and most importantly, along with unions, have basically sit on a table. They kind of make out a deal, like in Germany or Japan or South Korea. They may have an industrial policy. We'll attack these three industries, let's say semiconductor chips. We'll put more and more credit after that. And we have different names, Kiristu, and in Japan or South Korea and Germany. And this model works in a way where societies are much less heterogeneous, where the polity is less divided. So in India's case, as you know very well, trying to get promoters, unions, and banks on one table, in the Indian model, it will not work. That does not mean that we have to copy the Anglo-American model. What we are doing right now, actually, is we are trying to create our own model. We are shifting a bit towards Anglo-American, but we are keeping features of the continental model, and we are creating our own digital public goods. I'll give you two examples there. The development financial institution is something we kind of left back in the 1990s. In fact, some of our banks right now used to be DFIs. DFIs are basically institutions that do long-term lending for infrastructure or kind of heavy gestation industry. And so that's a very continental model. That's not Anglo-American. That's not capital market. Similarly, a bad bank is not typically seen as an Anglo-American thing. It is seen as a very continental East Asian idea, right? Along with Japan and South Korea, I must now add China to that example of that mix. And it's a very unique model where there is a very heavy state and there is something known as financial repression. For example, in China, you cannot easily take money out, or at least till recently. So what we are trying to do is we are saying we'll go more and more to the bond market. we'll go on more to the stock market. Our stock market is probably as efficient, as sophisticated as any developed market stock market. Our bond market is less so. What is known as BCD, bonds, currencies, derivatives, we are getting there. But simultaneously, we cannot let go of the entire banking / continental / East Asian model. And to fix it in this present now and here, because that might be a long-term trend, we have to have a DFI. We need to have a bad bank over and above the IBC. IBC is the structural fix. Bad bank is the temporary fix. The structural fix is the bond market, for example, InvITs, infrastructure investment trusts, REITs, real estate investment trusts, which raise money in a very arm's length model. But DFI is a 5 to 7 year fix. So basically what the Indian policymakers are saying, we will not choose. It's not either or. It's not a false binary. We will basically have all hands on board. Whatever it takes, jo lagega for getting the credit cycle up again, or getting infrastructure up again. So that is a mix of the Anglo-American and the continental / East Asian model. What we're adding new there are digital public goods in the form of financial data being shared in the form of metadata without compromising privacy and with due consent. The idea of GST-based tax data, the idea of UPI, the idea of all these transaction data being shared through an account aggregator, so that if you do not have assets, so how does typically lending work? You have some land, you have some flat or property, against that you take a loan, right? That is asset-backed lending. But what if you do not have assets? In fact, ironically, people who want to expand businesses don't necessarily have assets. What they do have is relatively healthy businesses. So what they need is not asset-based lending, but cash flow-based lending. And for that cash flow-based lending, you need data. You need lots of big data. And then you need somebody to do analytics on that, saying that if I actually go through his GST payments, if I go through his various inputs and outputs of cash, actually this guy deserves much more loans at a lower rate for XYZ reasons, given how predictable his business is. And because he did not have assets so far, we were not giving him loans. So that is something very new in India, which will take credit analytics to a different level altogether. And their banks and NBFCs might actually work together. So banks might just give bulk of the capital, and NBFCs and fintechs might be very good at this analytics. They'll take this data, they'll take Abhinav's data or Harsh's data and say, well, even if he or she has some assets, we can give them a loan without an asset collateral backing, maybe at a slightly higher rate, but not as high as you would have done in the past, because he or she has this frequent income source, which is relatively predictable and therefore reliable. And then on that, you add the credit score in the case of individuals, or its equivalent in the case of corporates and small corporates. So we are basically creating state capacity and a backbone, what Nandan Nilekani calls public utilities, what we can now call public digital goods, right? So India is actually on the cutting edge compared to the world. In fact, we are now taking UPI global. Next year, we'll have transfers between India and Singapore. And I think there is talk of doing that with UAE. But what is the missing part here before we really go global is an open capital account. Because agar aap technologically, if you can connect India and Singapore, that's great. You'll cut out the MasterCards and the visas, which is why a lot of American companies are lobbying against these changes, by the way, not for now, but across presidents. It's been happening that, Modi is promoting UPI. It has been a constant complaint. One of the reasons, if I may say so bluntly, why they sometimes have Indian American CEOs, despite them being very, very meritocratic and very good in their own way. Part of the reason is the lobbying of the Indian market, because it's the last big market open, unlike China, which has been closed, to kind of take into their system. So I think that this Anglo-American model, this continental model, and this new Indian digital public goods, this combination is something very new. And that will lead to a very healthy and a very big credit cycle in the next 5, 7, 10 years. Because unlike last time, see what happened earlier was, if you were an industrialist, 100 crore ka project aapko lagana hai, 100 crores, you would say 120 or 130 crores. You would overinflate the invoices earlier. You would go to a public sector bank. You would wine and dine the main guy. You would get the money for saying the overall project is 125 crores. And I need a loan of 100 crores. I am putting 25 crores from my own house. But actually, you would not put that 25 crores from your own house, because the invoices are inflated. And you would, so if basically it was 100% leverage. If it worked, you became much, much, much richer. If it didn't work, it became an NPA. And even when it worked, you would take out money from the company in cash. You would basically screw minority shareholders, whether they're listed or not, the company. And that entire system is collapsing because of combination of things, however imperfect, separately, like demonetization, GST, proper tax and kind of money tracking agreements between countries. So it's very difficult now to, for example, spend crores of rupees in cash in India without being tracked. You can't buy luxury cars that easily, for example, the way you could 5 or 10 years ago. Even real estate is being tracked, and in fact, they will end up bringing real estate and Aadhaar will be connected. I'm pretty sure the government will do that the moment we have an upcycle. I think the reason the government didn't do it in the last 2-3 years because एक बार में बहुत ज़्यादा reform हो गया था, and एक बार थोड़ा slow down हो गया था. So they said कि एक और धक्का भी नहीं देंगे. But I think once the cycle turns, and if the cycle is turning, they will connect that also. Please go
What
ahead.
you were saying is a nightmare for lots of people, connecting
Yes.
property and Aadhaar.
if you go to Lutyens, I'm just saying anecdotally, and I'm obviously not going to take any names. Like even some of the few flats in Lutyens, most of them are bungalow properties owned by the government or some few industrialists. The flats are often owned by some small politicians or bureaucrats, either directly or benami way, if you want to go and rent that, and I mean that's a small example of what's happening throughout the country. So this is a root and branch cleaning of the system, and which is why actually for some in the short term it actually led to lower growth because an entire mindset of doing business in India changed, and now they're like, now we want to do professionally. We want a listed company with a proper independent corporate board. We're having more and more shareholder activism. Which is a very kind of American thing, earlier. But now, for example, Puneet Goenka from Z Entertainment almost got kicked out of his own company because a large kind of institutional investor said, either improve things or get out. And now he has finally got Sony to invest in it. But the point is, promoters now have to be on their toes and they have to perform. They cannot easily take out money the way they used to. I'm not saying it has become 100% clean. But things have become so different that it is much easier for people outside of traditional business families, especially in the technology space, but more generally, to take this finance available through banks, through bonds, through venture capital, venture debt. The only missing part right now is one, the open capital account, and therefore the bond inflows, which will happen in the next few years, further lowering interest rates. And secondly, judicial reforms and contract enforcement, so that people don't realize that finance and business, if you want to truly democratize it beyond a few privileged communities and castes, then the best way to do that is have a functioning state judicial system, whereby even if I don't, हमारे बीच में traditional roti beti ka rishta nahi hai, because that used to be the way to name and shame somebody if somebody kind of did something against you in business. But if you want to make sure that we can have across communities very kind of trust-based dealings, then ultimately you need a good judicial system. Yep. And I think that is one thing which is missing. That is also the thing which is keeping something like IBC from becoming even more efficient. Actually, if you do proper adjustments, IBC is already better than the earlier systems in terms of recovery. We can get 40-45 paisa on the rupee. Earlier, it was like maybe 15-20 paisa. So the recovery of bad assets is already improved, but to make it further better, what along a lot economic reforms bahut ho gaya, but administrative reforms, state capacity wala part, especially judicial and bureaucratic. I think those are the next big things to do, but they're also more difficult to do, as you know very well.
A very interesting point, Harsh. But you talked about digital public goods. And India is one of the leading countries in that space. And we've recently seen that how UK is trying to, de-recognize the CoWIN app and other things. So what does the future look like in the realm of the digital public goods in India, and how it will transform people's life, especially in the sector of money, banking, and finance?
See, I think what happens is, because we have a lot of technology talent, we have some good technocrats, and we have relatively clean, honest, and forward-looking government in place. This is across parties, but I would say in this government, it has doubled down on digital public goods. We don't have existing entrenched lobbies. The way MasterCard and Visa would always get some money through every transaction. And then here we come with Bharat Pay or UPI or some Indian indigenous credit card system with zero or much lower fees. and it threatens existing monopolies, right? Now what we are doing with Account Aggregator is basically what 1,000 startups could have done. But by making it a digital public good, you're saying you create 10,000 startups on top of it, but इस पे आप पैसा मत बनाओ, इसको एक public data information रहने दो. And in fact, to some extent, China is also now doing that. The way Chinese are cracking down on their startups. There are multiple reasons for that. The Communist Party is authoritarian. Xi Jinping does not want parallel power centers. But one of the big reasons is the few big digital behemoths in China, they basically became digital walled gardens, right? They had their own massive sets of data. And the Chinese are realizing what Indians realized a couple of years earlier, that this part need not be private. It's, for example, even if you privatize railways in India, if you get out of digital for a moment, you will privatize not the railway stock, not the lines. You will privatize the right to use it for some time and the overlying actual carriage and wagon, right? Because if you privatize the underlying railway track and there are no parallel railway tracks, and that becomes a monopoly in that area, right? That's just basic economics 101. So in India, we are saying as much as possible metadata of end users and retail and individuals and customers, let us try to make it publicly available on a free access. For example, what is eKYC? It is now so much easier for you and me to open a brokerage account. Sometimes regulators forcibly put one paper requirement, but broadly speaking, opening a bank account and brokerage account is much easier than 5 years ago. Why? Because this OTP system and this Aadhaar system, right? OTP is your mobile, Aadhaar, and obviously linked to the bank, and then obviously Aadhaar, which is basically the jam trinity. So that suddenly says that I have a unique ID which I can verify in a way that is trustworthy for the end customer and the end corporation and the government. And just imagine how that is leading to massive competition in banking, brokerage. The brokerage industry has basically seen new digital players completely sidestep and sideline the old traditional brokerages, which are phone heavy and in-person heavy. So you create so many more business models, and we are only scratching the surface. Imagine somebody is doing an Uber Ola job in a city and making good or some decent money for his family, but he has fair amount of land in his village in UP or Bihar. But usko abhi wo land digitized nahi hua hai. Wo hoga in due course of time. We are doing that through drones, through various projects, pilot projects. Once it is digitized and it's in some proper government data system, which banks and NBFCs can access, on top of that, you kind of take an account aggregator approach and see uske bank khate mein kitna paisa regularly aa raha hai. So you have a mix of asset and cash flow based lending for somebody who already has a property maybe worth 50 lakh or 1 crores, but he's earning only say 25,000 rupees a month in the city, and he suddenly has some big expense for health or for some family personal reason or some marriage, and he would have gone to some money lender in the village at 15, 20, 30, 40% interest rate. अब वो उसको 8-9% में मिल सकता है. So property तो उसकी है, property वो किसी से चुरा नहीं रहा है. But so what was missing was this intermediate system of getting data efficiently from the person who has it to the person who will lend and therefore take a decision on that. तो उसमें बैड बैंक तो बहुत छोटा सा हिस्सा है कि बैड बैंक तो खाली बैलेंस शीट्स क्लीन कर रहा है. बट बैलेंस शीट क्लीनिंग का एक हिस्सा जो हमने डिस्कस नहीं किया, जो मैंने अपने हिंदुस्तान टाइम्स के आर्टिकल में लिखा था कि इंडियाज फाइनेंशियल सिस्टम गेट्स अ रीसेट, was कि once bond yields fall, bond prices go up. So what, as anybody, so for example, agar interest rates, bond yields on India's 10-year, the government of India's 10-year bond goes from 7% to 6%, then bond prices go up. It's a bit counterintuitive for those who are not in the finance or economics. So bond yields have fallen in the last 2-3 years, and that has actually increased the treasury profits of banks. Some of these banks, some of these bonds are held on their treasury, their personal proprietary bank balance sheets under what is known as MTM, mark to market. So that if that further falls, udhar se bhi bank balance sheet repair hoga, aapke ARC bad bank se repair hoga, plus IBC aa raha hai, to waisi, they are recovering more money. They don't have to write off full of it. And then once they have all their money, how do they lend it out? They lend it out through these better public digital goods like account aggregators, Jam Trinity, and they kind of co-lend with NBFCs and fintechs बिकॉज इंडिया का क्रेडिट डिपॉजिट रेशियो लास्ट ईयर 72% था, इस साल 69% है. And a lot is around 155, 160 trillion deposits है total rupees, जिसमें से 100 trillion retail है, and around 110 trillion out of 160 trillion is lent out. तो बाकी जो 50 trillion का जो gap है उसमें से 45 trillion is basically lent out to the government. So when banks don't have, I mean, some they have to park by regulation, but more than that, when they don't have any money to lend out, what they do is they park the money at the reverse repo rate with the government, जो अभी 3.35% है. बट इसीलिए आप देख रहे हैं कि इंडिया में होम लोन और मॉर्गेज रेट्स कम हो रहे हैं, जो 2-3 साल पहले 8% था, 6.5% आ गया है. बिकॉज बैंक्स आर सेइंग, you know, home loans are one of the safest loans to do because somebody is putting 20% up. There is an asset. If he or she fails to pay, then I can take that asset. The real estate cycle is turning. I am parking the money with the government at 3.35%. Here I am getting on a floating variable basis 6.5%. So why not make 300 basis points more? So India में actually banking में जितनी competition होनी चाहिए उतनी competition है नहीं. And what technology and these digital public goods will do will allow more and more players directly in bank form or indirectly in NBFC form, fintech form, and that will reduce this obvious 300 basis point gaps. So net फायदा क्या होगा? Net फायदा customers को होगा. Because the point is we don't want banks to make profit for the sake of making profits, right? If they make profits in a competitive system, then it's fine. But if they're making profits in a system where there is a quasi-monopoly, then that is not good for economic growth. So by opening the access of this individual data to everybody, if I give consent, then some bank can say, well, you know, instead of 6.5%, I can give you a home loan at 6.2%. And then I can take a call that, okay, based on the brand and the service, whether 30 basis points come ke chakkar mein, do I want to go to a smaller bank or not, right? But maybe it's fine. Ultimately, they're lending me money and they will make less profit, but they can grow the market share. So this, we are very, very under leveraged. What happens in India is all our economists and intellectuals look at the West and udhar ke debates hum idhar copy paste karte hain, chahe wo society politics mein ho, economics mein ho. Now, West is actually getting over leveraged along with China and Japan in terms of personal debt, in terms of corporate debt, in terms of government debt, all three. But India may actually, that is not the situation. India may, in fact, personal debt कभी-कभी ज़्यादा चुकता है क्योंकि interest rate ज़्यादा high है. In terms of debt to GDP, it's not high. In terms of debt servicing to GDP, it's high. But that's because we have a 10-year at 6%. In the West, it might be at 1.3% in the US, for example. There's a 500 basis point difference. And there is no reason for that. So once we open the bond market starting next year, the rupee is remaining flat, and we can't discuss the rupee right now because that will take too much time. But the long story short is that the rupee is remaining relatively healthy for the next few years. And then a lot of people will say, why do we need a 500 basis point spread between India and US? And then a lot of foreign money will start coming in. I think we are underestimating how much money will come into our debt markets. You know, right now what we are doing stupidly is we are allowing full money to come into our stock markets, but not in debt market. तो बेसिकली आप बोल रहे हैं कि आप हमारा बिजनेस का प्रॉफिट का हिस्सा आप खरीद लो, लेकिन अगर आप हमें लोन दे रहे हो तो उसमें थोड़ी मनाइए. सो बेसिकली आप मक्खन खा लो, बट जो रिलेटिवली लेस यील्डिंग पार्ट है वो खाली इंडियंस करेंगे. And what that is doing is, because of that cost of capital being higher for Indian businesses, except a few Ambanis, etc., a lot of Indian real estate businesses and technology companies, their marginal investor is a foreign investor, which is fine. अगर वो foreign investor invest करना चाह रहा है, we are more than welcoming that. But why should, are we not selling our best assets to foreigners simply because we are artificially keeping our interest rates on the higher side? क्यों? क्योंकि हमने inflation targeting कर दी, हमने inflation कम कर दिया. बट लोग नॉमिनली सोचते हैं. अगर आप पॉलिटिक्स में आप समझते हैं इस बात को, अगर आप अचानक से स्मॉल सेविंग रेट्स कम कर देंगे तो लोगों को ये समझाना मुश्किल है ना कि इन्फ्लेशन 10 से 4% आ गया है. वो तो बोलेंगे कि आपने हमारा पीपीएफ का 8% से 6% कर दिया. वो 2% पे ध्यान देंगे. वो पोस्ट इन्फ्लेशन जो 600 बेसिस पॉइंट का फायदा है उस पर ध्यान नहीं देंगे. सो दीज थिंग्स हैव टू हैपन इन अ पॉलिटिकल कॉन्टेक्स्ट. दे हैपन स्लोली, बट despite all the pressure, the government renewed the inflation mandate of targeting 4%. तो हमने एक पूरे इकोसिस्टम मैक्रो इकोनॉमिक फाइनेंशियल ऐसा बना दिया है कि बहुत हेल्दी कॉर्पोरेट फाइनेंशियल रिटेल डेट ग्रोथ अगले 5 to 10 years में होगी. जो भी टफ डिसीजंस लेने थे वो हमने आई थिंक मोर और लेस ले लिए. एंड नाउ fortunately, unlike the Vajpayee time, all the guy who took the tough decision this time got re-elected. And therefore, उसका फल भी एक तरीके से वो पाएंगे 2024 तक. And that is politically very important because अगर वापस वाजपेयी वाला सिचुएशन होता तो अगली बार कोई टफ डिसीजंस नहीं लेता. वो बोलता कि टफ डिसीजन मैं लेता हूं और अगला आदमी पावर पे आकर इसका फायदा ले लेता है. So I think that is the broad context of what is happening in Indian finance. कि हमने बहुत tough decisions ले लिए हैं, and now it is time to perhaps for a few years enjoy that without being complacent.
Yeah, true. Fair point. I mean, such changes take some time to yield their result and full impact on the economy. And this exactly happened with the Vajpayee government. Exactly. They enacted the reforms. The benefits were reaped by the Manmohan Singh government, the UPA one. And the mess they created, they suffered in the UPA too. So great. I mean, great discussion with you, Harsh. This is a long discussion. Perhaps we'll continue discussing what is happening in the finance and the banking sector at regular intervals. But thanks for your time. Thanks for your time, Harsh.
Thank you, Abhinav, for having me. See you soon.
Sure. And thank you, audience, for listening to us. Please don't forget to subscribe to the channel. You can also support the channel if you like. Hoping to see you soon. Thank you.